God, touch my lips of clay, that my words may not just be my words, that we all may be inspired by your Holy Scripture. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, normally I get the shudders when it comes down to a particularly difficult set of Bible reading, because we follow the lectionary, and sometimes you get something, your toes curl, and you think, oh, heck. But we're talking about a commemoration of catastrophe for this nation and for the West. Those infernal chimneys of September the 11th ought to remind us that it is only our historic privilege which has kept us safe from such catastrophes, and that such catastrophes are the everyday reality for nations all over the world. And that for us, our faith needs to be able to be something more than just an affirmation of comfort and an affirmation of whatever life we would like to live. Parents, when they're bringing up children, and children are going through that phase where they ask endless questions, always reach a point where their answer becomes because. And they always reach that point where they're just fed up with constantly asking questions, and they say, because! Faith leaders are prone to exactly the same temptations. They have glimpsed, we hope, that vision glorious, and in their vanity we assume, that the route that we travelled is the only one, and that they have suddenly become God's sole prophet. It falls upon us uniquely, then, to lead the Israelites from Egypt and not to have to explain our rationale at every single stage with embarrassing and irritating questions. We've been anointed. We've been ordained to this purpose, and every method is fair game to corral the flock safely into pasture. It could be said that Jeremiah has reached the point where he feels the need to fortify his because with some stern warnings, that his despair over the idiocy of the people who just can't see it has driven him to threaten them with every sort of horror in order to bring them into line, in order to try and wrestle them back into the pasture wherein safety resides. But you know, locking the sheep in the pasture is not the point of it all. It's not the point of our life, and it's not the point of our spiritual life, and it's not the point of spiritual leadership, whatever that may be. Folk could remain safe and in the bosom of the divine by never being born. Ships are safest when they remain in harbour, but that's not what they're built for. To put it another way, there has to be more than life than being thrown off the truck of divinity and spending the rest of your years trying to catch it up again and clamber back on. There has to be more to life than just trying to reclaim what you had. Furthermore, there has to be more than life and morality than shouting, yay, at all things comfortable, and boo at anything that hurts. This is a poor foundation for a system of morality. And yet, the morality of most of us and the society in which they live is just a way of saying, yay, comfort, boo, discomfort. It's just a way of gilding that particular lily and making it look like an ethical system when it's not what it is. We cannot escape the reality that creation contains a whole lot of things that appear to not have the slightest concern for human comfort or longevity. It would appear from the evidence in our eyes that tapeworms and cystic fibrosis, fire ants and earthquakes are all as beloved of creation, and hence may be God, as are the things that we cling to and the couches we ease our backsides onto every evening. It would appear that God has more in mind for humanity than being happily warehoused for as long as possible with as few nasties and as many happies as can be managed. Catastrophes and early deaths, illness and pain, sorrow and despair are not merely side effects of naughtiness or divine oversights. They are deeply woven into the business of creation, and therefore the events we experience as pain are not meaningless, they are not retribution, and they are not signs of our failure, and they are not always to be avoided at all costs, but they are integral to the mysteries of the divine and are part of an overarching and universal truth within which we can find God. So maybe Jeremiah had a deeper motive. Maybe it wasn't just about frightening people into good behavior. Maybe Jeremiah has an awkward question for us. Is our love of what we call God and our search for what we call truth entirely dependent on God doing what we want? Is creation only glorious when we remain in it entirely on our own terms and with a status and well-being that we consider our due? Is God the all-knowing wellspring of all things only when that wellspring's knowledge and desire accord with ours, and ours as it is today, in the here and now, our current fancy? The picture may be confusing you a little. I've preached about these people before, once. It's kind of a strange thing to preach about. They are the Oguri Sadhus. They follow a branch of Tantric Veda religion. They are a branch of Hinduism. And the Agoris believe that Lord Shiva made all things and is all-powerful, therefore nothing is repulsive or unclean in itself. And to suggest otherwise is a form of blasphemy. Now here's where I diverge. They fashion their drinking cups from the skulls of the dead to make the point that what we see as good or bad, repulsive or evil, is often just comfort or discomfort, social convention or tradition. That much of our morality is the equivalent of plate fright. It is the equivalent of being served a food that you are unfamiliar with and that you immediately find repulsive and revolting, and therefore you equate it with immorality and you equate it with evil. The Agori Sadhus go to extremes to challenge this idea that creation is divided into good and bad solely according to the tradition that we grow up in that finds things tasteful or distasteful, pleasant or unpleasant. They smear themselves with the ashes of the cremated, and they dwell in the burning ghats of Varanasi and in burial grounds all over India, and they are strange and terrifying people. But I would suggest we probably don't need to do that in order to accept that comfort is not the overriding signifier of God's grace at work on earth, and that sometimes discomfort, terrifying discomfort, pain and trauma and catastrophe mean that there are things at work in this world which have a greater and more overarching consideration than the length of life. And that unless we see all human life as uniquely precious, no matter what its duration is, or what its order of existence or social status is, that we will forever see our spiritual life as an attempt to make God in our image, and as an attempt to treat God as that divine vending machine who is only glorious when it pays out what we require.